Archaeology is one of the only professions where finding well-preserved human remains constitutes a good day of work. Today, we're going to be taking a look at 15 of the scariest archaeological finds. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and slam that notification bell so that you don't miss any of our amazing uploads. Number 15. The Vikings of Dorset. Back in June of 2009, while excavating an area near the town of Weymouth in Dorset, England, archaeologists made a discovery that shocked everyone who was there to see it. They appeared to have discovered a pit that was turned into a sort of mass grave. Inside the massive burial site, the archaeologists discovered 54 skeletons that had all been dismembered, and in an entirely separate pile, they discovered 51 of the skulls that belonged to those skeletons. The remains have since been discovered to belong to Scandinavian Vikings. The mass grave puzzled countless archaeologists because not only were the mass graves considered to be rare, but one of this size was simply unheard of. The exact date of the mass execution isn't entirely clear, though it's believed the grave dates back to the Middle Ages, some point between the 5th and 10th centuries. The skeletons showed no sign of war wounds, so it's believed that the grave was the result of a hasty and chaotic mass execution of Viking men who were likely prisoners at the time of death. Number 14. The Pit of Death. In 2012, during a real estate project that was taking place in France, a team of archaeologists discovered a hole in the ground that was filled from the bottom to the top with bones. The pit was roughly 6.5 feet deep and 5 feet in diameter and was filled with dismembered bones from severed arms to fingers. These bones belonged to people who ranged from the age of infancy to adults. Along with the dismembered bones, there were also several bodies that were still intact that had been thrown into the pit as well. After studying the bones and running tests, it's been determined that the bones dated back to more than 5,335 years before they were discovered. Researchers believe that the bodies were likely casualties of war. Number 13. Ancient chemical warfare. Scientists and historians were blown away when it was discovered that a group of Persian soldiers might have resorted to complex chemical warfare as far back as 2,000 years ago. During a siege that the Persians were attempting on Syria, which was being held by Rome at the time, the Persian soldiers dug tunnels as a way to penetrate the walls of the city. And when the Roman soldiers attempted to dig their own tunnels, the Persians thought of a horrifying trap. It's believed that they used some sort of petrochemical smoke that would have essentially turned the lungs of the Roman soldiers in the tunnels into acid. This was discovered during an excavation of the tunnels throughout the 1920s and 30s. Number 12. Neanderthals VS Cannibals. Deep within a cave system in northwest Spain known as El Sidrón, archaeologists discovered signs of cannibalism amongst certain groups, tribes, or clans of Neanderthals. The discovery was made in 1994 when a group of scientists discovered the remains of 12 different Neanderthal people who were believed to have belonged to the same family. The remains belonged to a family that consisted of 3 children, 3 teens, and 6 adults from over 51,000 years ago. Further research and forensics have determined that the family met a gruesome death when they were killed and eaten by a different group or family of Neanderthals. Number 11. Mass graves from the Civil War. As the Durham University in England was working on expanding a section of their library, the workers came upon a discovery that surprised many. Archaeologists were excavating the area ahead of time so that construction could begin immediately when they discovered not 1, but 2 mass graves that contained nearly 17,000 skeletons. The skeletons were dated back to the mid-1600s and are believed to have been the remains of Scottish prisoners of war. They were likely held captive during the Third English Civil War, and due to the lack of trauma found on the bodies, it's believed that they likely died of disease while being imprisoned. Following their death, the bodies were thrown into a massive unmarked burial site. Number 10. Infant bones in the sewer. While excavating a sewer that was located underneath an ancient Roman bathhouse in Askelton, Israel, a group of archaeologists made a truly haunting discovery. While carefully excavating the area, the group began to discover hundreds of small bones that began to show up in the ground. These bones were discovered to have belonged to just under 100 bodies, and all of them were the remains of newborn babies. Number 9. The Terracotta Army. One of the most famous archaeological discoveries came on March the 29th, 1974, when a group of farmers who had been digging a well for water discovered something beyond interesting in the Shaanxi province of China. As they dug through the earth, they stumbled upon an army of over 6,000 soldiers made out of terracotta that had been constructed to protect the tomb of the first Qin emperor. Number 8. Preserved brain from 600 BC. In England, back in 2009, a group of archaeologists discovered something that scientists found truly interesting. Not only did they happen to find the skull of a man who had been killed in 600 BC, but inside of the skull, they found a brain that had been almost perfectly preserved. It still puzzles researchers to this day how the brain remained so well preserved inside the skull of a man who had been buried for thousands of years. It's believed the man was between the ages of 26 and 45. Number 7. Bodies in the bog. Peat farming is one of the less appealing professions when it comes to farming, not only because of the harsh and bog-like environment, but also because of what they might encounter sometimes when wading through the bog. Every now and then, when a peat farmer is working in Northern Europe, they might come across an ancient corpse in the bog that, thanks to the environment, is typically preserved well. To make things even creepier, it's said that some of these bodies are those of people who were actually murdered in some sort of ancient ritual in the bog that was said to bring a good harvest. Number 6. The Sunken Tomb of Skulls. At the bottom of a dried-up lake bed in Motala, Sweden, archaeologists discovered what they originally thought was a foundation to some sort of ancient structure. However, after doing some further digging and research, they discovered that they in fact unearthed a burial site for not only animals but also 10 human skulls from over 8,000 years ago. Most of the skulls had stakes through them, and they were believed to be placed there to keep them submerged. Number 5. Shackled Skeletons. Archaeologists discovered a mass grave that's believed to contain the followers of Cylon just outside of Athens. Cylon was a tyrant who attempted to take over Athens in 632 BC, and it's believed that his followers were taken into custody before being executed. The thing that made this discovery particularly gruesome was the manner in which the skeletons were found. Most of the 80 skeletons found in this mass grave were still shackled together, all of which stared straight upward with their jaws wide open as archaeologists looked down onto them in the burial site. The men are believed to have been prisoners who likely died between 625 and 650 BC. Number 4. The Creature of Mount Owen. Now, I know that dragons aren't real, but after seeing this, I can absolutely see why people in countless ancient cultures have written about them. In 1987, a group of archaeologists was in the process of running a routine expedition in New Zealand. Their trip found them in a cave system on Mount Owen, and once inside, they discovered something straight out of a medieval knight storybook. Dubbed the Creature of Mount Owen, this monstrous dragon-like foot was found still intact and preserved. After examining the foot, it was determined to have belonged to a large prehistoric bird known as the moa bird. The remains date back to more than 3,300 years ago. Number 3. Frozen child sacrifices. In 1985, as mountaineers climbed in Argentina, they made a terrifying discovery. As they climbed near Aconcagua in Argentina, they ended up discovering something that had been hidden away inside of a stone structure. What they found was the mummified remains of a 7-year-old who had died more than 500 years before being discovered. It's believed that the boy was part of an ancient Incan ritual known as Capucocha. The ritual involved gathering children from various regions who had lived in the city of Cuzco before being sealed into a tomb to die as a form of sacrifice. Number 2. The Frankenstein Skeletons. When scientists discovered the perfectly preserved skeletons of what they originally believed to be 2 people, they were more than excited to begin studying them. However, a professor at the University of Manchester named Terry Brown believed that something was off about the skeletons. It took him nearly a decade to figure it out, but when he did, the entire archaeological community was shocked. It turns out that the discovered skeletons actually contained bones from 6 different people and were all placed together in that way. Further research determined that each piece of the body had been submerged and preserved in the bog before the Frankenstein-like creation was put together. How eerie is that? Number 1. The Vampire Burial. Now, everyone knows the story of Dracula and the myth or lore behind vampires, but did you know that throughout the 1600s and 1700s, people feared so much the idea of bloodsuckers being returned from the dead that some people in Poland were buried in ways to prevent vampires from being created? Vampire burials were discovered by researchers in 2014 at the Drosko Cemetery in Poland. It was heard that bodies were discovered to have been buried with rocks wedged under their chins and with some sickles placed over their necks. It's believed that these people were buried like this by their friends or locals who feared that they would return from the dead to suck the blood out of the townspeople. It should be noted that these measures took place after the individuals were already dead. Most of the bodies found this way belonged to people who died from diseases or natural causes. What was the most interesting archaeological find in this video? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our uploads.